Welcome to Ministries That Podcast, where I talk to successful ministry leaders about how they're using podcasting to amplify their mission and grow their ministry so you can too. I'm Tim Hull, your host and owner of Sonomorphic, a podcast production company that specializes in podcasting for ministries. This is a How They Could podcast episode, so I'll be unpacking my strategy for a ministry that doesn't have a podcast, but I really think they should. Today I'm talking about The Chosen, the first ever multi-season TV show about the life of Jesus seen through the eyes of those who knew him. Now, we're just a couple of days away from the premiere of season 4 of The Chosen that's coming to theaters on February 1st. They have a YouTube channel that has over 2.3 million subscribers. They have a community called The Chosen Insiders and held their first live event called ChosenCon in the fall of last year. There are podcasts out there that talk about The Chosen, but they're not from the producer, the directors, actors themselves. They're from fans or TV and movie reviewers, and not a branded podcast for The Chosen. So I'm going to talk through 3 things. First, the reasons I think The Chosen could start a very successful podcast. Second, the value of having a podcast in addition to the YouTube channel and TV series. And then third and final, a few different podcast formats that they could choose from based on their top performing content on YouTube and other content that they've already created. So let's jump right in. Number 1, the reasons I think The Chosen could start a very successful podcast. Well, they already have a large online following. As I just mentioned, they have a YouTube audience of over 2.3 million subscribers. It currently says 2.36 million subscribers on YouTube, and they have almost 185 million views on all the videos that they've published. And then on social media, they have 3.8 million followers on Facebook, and then they have a private Facebook group called The Chosen Insiders that has 94,000 members in it. They also have an Instagram following of 1.5 million, and they have 530,000 followers on TikTok. So they have a large online following. They have people that are interested in The Chosen, that are already engaging with them on social, on YouTube. And so the next piece of this is people want to know. Basically, fans want to know the behind the scenes and the insider information about the TV series. I mean, that's why they have the Chosen Insiders private Facebook group with 94,000 members in it. You can go search for whatever's happening right now with The Chosen. And so you could find behind the scenes content. Now, some of that's on their YouTube channel, some of that's on their social platforms, but they're going to find that content, whether it's from The Chosen on one of those platforms or from another YouTuber or podcaster that's reviewing it, that's talking about it, that's seeing these snippets that are coming out on social and analyzing them and talking about what's going on. So, I mean, this is why fan and reviewer podcasts and YouTube channels exist. People want this type of content. So why not give them that content straight from the source with a podcast? I mean, give fans the ability to spend more time with The Chosen, just give them a podcast. So those are my top reasons why I think The Chosen could start a very successful podcast. They have a large audience and people want to know about what's happening with The Chosen. All right, that brings us to number 2, the value of having a podcast in addition to the YouTube channel and TV series. So the first thing here in this section is that it's more cost effective. I mean, creating videos for YouTube, specifically how I've seen them do it with multiple camera angles on things, shooting B-roll, recording in the studio, recording in the field, that takes a lot of time and effort. Whereas with a podcast, it's usually you sit down, you record something in front of a mic, maybe a camera, and you edit it and publish it. So it's a lot more cost effective to create a podcast. I mean, they can use the same setup from their YouTube channel. They have a look with 2 mics sitting at a table with a nice background in a room, a nice studio environment, and just record the podcast. All right, the next piece in this section is a podcast would be a great content creation engine for The Chosen. I mean, podcasting is a great way to capture content and then distribute that across multiple platforms. So in this case, what I'm meaning is they can cut it up into short form video for, YouTube Shorts, Instagram Reels, and TikTok, all of that to increase awareness and get the word out there that The Chosen exists. We have this podcast. Check us out. Dive deeper. We've got more content for you. This is something that I do for my podcast. I record this podcast on video so that I can cut it up into short social clips that then just helps create awareness and I can post on social. I mean, I've been telling people lately, if I didn't have a podcast, I would not be posting on social anywhere close to what I'm doing right now. So that's just boosting your presence on social platforms is a huge piece of that. And then they've also got articles on their website that having content created via a podcast could then be repurposed for an article on their website and boost the SEO there. And then the third thing is exclusive content to pitch media. So this is another increase awareness play. But basically, if you can capture content, exclusive content specifically, that people aren't going to get anywhere else, that they can then pitch to media, because there's media outlets out there that want to know what's happening with The Chosen, want to know what's coming next, because as I already said, there's a big fan following that want to know this kind of thing. They can say, hey, we recorded this piece of content that hasn't been heard anywhere else. Do you want to pick it up and write a story about it for your media outlet? So that'd be increasing awareness. All right, another piece in this section about the value of having a podcast in addition to the YouTube channel and TV series is engage fans year-round with content. Now, similar to what they're doing with the medium form 5 to 10 minute videos on their YouTube channel, a podcast would be long form content. I'm thinking 30 to 60 minutes here, and it just will help build deeper relationships with their fans that they already have. I mean, there are 90 plus thousand people that are in the Chosen Insiders group. They probably want a podcast like this, and I'm sure other people would be interested in it as well. It just gives the Chosen an opportunity to create the ability for people to spend more time with them. So that's huge. And then along with that, you can create a medium in which to activate the audience with the Come and See initiative. So I learned about this as I was doing some research. This is an initiative that they have this specific mission, and I'll quote this here. We're on a mission to ensure that all 7 seasons of The Chosen are globally distributed, translated into 600 languages, and free for all. So that's a great initiative that they're putting out there, and is going to take a lot of time, money, effort, and donations from so many people. So you can donate to that initiative, and it would be great to get that in front of more people that are fans or super fans even of The Chosen, and just help spread the word that initiative is out there and advance that as quickly as possible. So there's just a few ways in which having a podcast in addition to the YouTube channel and TV series would be very valuable for The Chosen. All right, that brings us to number 3, a few different podcast formats that they could choose from based on their top performing content on YouTube and other content that they've already created. So we'll spend a decent amount of time here on these ones, but the first is behind the scenes. And this looks like interviews with the actors, director, writers, any number of people that are on set, and they're already doing this on other podcasts and YouTube channels. So Dallas Jenkins, the creator and director of The Chosen, has gone on several different podcasts or YouTube channels to be interviewed and talk about The Chosen, what's going on with the upcoming season, what's going on behind the scenes, asking them certain questions about certain scenes in detail, like how they did certain special effects, that kind of thing. So really interesting stuff that fans of The Chosen are really interested in, but they're all coming from these other channels. And so I think it'd be great to have a podcast that's specifically from The Chosen, talking about the behind the scenes. I mean, they're already doing this in shorter form content on their Instagram page with their posts there and other short form content that they're putting on YouTube as well. But let's have a podcast that can talk about that in more detail and more depth. And as I said, at a lower cost. You're not having to film it. You're not having to go on site necessarily. You're just sitting down with somebody, and it could even be remotely. So another reason why I think this is a great format for them is a little personal story from me that I shared part of, at least in the first episode of this podcast that I did with Nathan Hubler about the official Adventures in Odyssey podcast. That's the first podcast that I ever listened to. And that podcast is a behind the scenes podcast for Adventures in Odyssey. And that was the first time that I found out and learned what a sound designer did. And that's really what got me into audio production. So I think it'd be cool not only just to hear from the actors, directors, and writers and how they do what they do with this behind the scenes format, but also encourage people that don't even know that these type of jobs or roles exist and present them as potential careers for people that are watching The Chosen and interested in production and that kind of a thing. So I'm kind of rambling on about that, but I'll put a link in the show notes for my episode with Nathan Hubler. And then one other piece that they could do with this behind the scenes format could be audio only teasers of scenes before they're released on video. Now, obviously with film, a lot of what is happening is portrayed by the visual elements. But what would it be like if you had a segment on the podcast for this behind the scenes podcast and you're trying to stump the director and you play a scene from The Chosen from one of the past seasons, maybe an obscure scene, and just play the audio of it and maybe not even have any dialogue and see if they can call out and know where that's from. That could be a fun way to test them on that, as well as for the audience to try and figure it out as well. That might be a good audience involvement piece, but I think that'd be fun. Audio only teasers of scenes before they're released on video. So that's one format. Another format is commentary. So this is something from my research I found out that they do to some extent, but I think it would be great to have this as a podcast. So they do these Bible roundtables. And there was this one video on YouTube that I specifically saw, and the title of it was "A Rabbi, a Priest, and an Evangelical Fact-Checked The Chosen." So in that video, a rabbi, a priest, and an evangelical pastor, I believe, sits down with Dallas Jenkins, the director and creator of The Chosen, and they talk through the different scenes and make sure that it's as accurate historically, biblically as it possibly can be. And from what I heard, they make tweaks in these recordings and talk through, okay, this needs to actually happen a little bit like this because that wouldn't actually have happened in that order, or, something of that nature. And so that, I think, is a really interesting format. You're digging deeper into the biblical side of things and the historical side of things. And a lot of people are really interested in that. I mean, this is the exact format that the Bible Project does with their podcast. And I had John Collins and Dan Gumwell on my podcast. I'll put a link in the show notes if you want to check out that interview. But John Collins and Tim Mackey sit down and they record a podcast, and they're just talking through the passages and the questions that they have about those passages as they're putting together a series for Bible Project. And so that kind of discussion is really popular. I mean, the Bible Project is frequently in the top 10 of the religion and spirituality chart on Apple Podcasts. So that's a really great format, and a lot of people gravitate toward that and want to dive deeper. All right, and then this is the final format that I put down. That I think these are the top 3 that would really work well for them. This third one is small group discussion. So this is an interesting one in that at our church that we attend here in Columbus, Ohio, Rock City Church, they actually have small groups that meet and watch and discuss each episode of The Chosen. And this seems to be a pretty common thing. I mean, The Chosen actually put out a Bible study guide for seasons 1 through 3. So why not make that a podcast? That'd be a great way to walk people through that content and lead the discussion and have conversations around what's happening in The Chosen, where that's at in the Bible, all of that kind of thing. So I think it could be great to potentially even have guests on, people that are historical and biblical experts, and talk about the historical context of the Bible and give background info and commentary on what's going on in The Chosen and why certain things happened the way that they did, and just kind of dig deeper into some of that maybe historical context as well as the life of Jesus and what's actually happening and taking place. And that could all be geared towards, okay, then discuss this with your group. I mean, the podcast could potentially even be basically the facilitator of the group. You have a leader that's kind of setting it up, but everybody can listen to the podcast. They hear the questions on there, but then the group leader is the one that's going to ask them that. So they know what the questions are going to be. The group leader can go to their website or whatever and download the PDF of the questions, something like that. But I think, small group discussion around The Chosen seems to be something that's rather popular. So I think this would be a super effective format, this small group discussion type format that would lend itself really well for churches to then pick up and amplify the message of The Chosen and get people more engaged in a small group in a different way. You're not just doing a regular book study. It's just a different way to engage with the Bible. And so those are 3 great formats that I think could work really well for The Chosen. All right, so now I got a question for you. If you were to choose, which format do you think The Chosen should use for their podcast? I'm going to put a poll on Instagram and LinkedIn. So you tell me which one, behind the scenes, commentary, or small group discussion. I'd love to see which one rises to the top and which one you think would be best for them, which one you like the most. We'll put that on LinkedIn and Instagram. Go check that out and let me know. All right, well, there you have it. That's my podcast strategy for The Chosen. I hope this episode got you thinking about some ideas for your own podcast, whether you're just thinking about starting one or you've been publishing one for years. All right, well, that brings us to the high pass segment where we ignore the lows and I ask about some of your favorite things. So because it's just me today, I'll be asking myself this question as I've been doing in the How They Could podcast episodes. What's your favorite tool for recording remote podcast interviews? So this would be Riverside.fm. I've been using this for years. Used it back when I worked at Ramsey Solutions for recording the Andre Leadership podcast when I produced that show. And it's a great platform for capturing high quality audio and video locally on both ends of a call or multiple ends if you have even more than two people on a call doing an interview. And it uploads while the conversation is going on. And then it finishes uploading right after you hit stop. And then you can download those files from everybody that was on the call and put that together in your podcast. So super easy way to record a remote podcast interview and get great quality. So instead of using Zoom and using the files that Zoom will give you, you can get files from Zoom, but they don't sound nearly as good or look nearly as good as what you're going to get from Riverside. So that is what I use. I'm going to put an affiliate link in the show notes if you want to check it out. I'd love for you to support me by using that link so you can check that out there. Well, that's going to do it for this episode of Ministries That Podcast, produced by Sonomorphic. If you enjoyed today's episode, text it to a friend or share it on social media. Together, we can help more ministries grow and thrive through podcasting. And this is only the third How They Could podcast episode, so I want your feedback. Are you enjoying these episodes? Let me know by messaging me on LinkedIn or Instagram. I'd love to know your feedback, whether you like them, whether you don't. Tell me your thoughts. I want to make these episodes the best that they possibly can be for ministry leaders like you that are running a podcast or wanting to start a podcast. All right, now come back in 2 weeks to hear from Marty Solomon and Brent Billings from the Bema podcast. We're going to talk about how the Bema podcast started out as a class for college students, how people have discussion groups about the podcast all over the world, and the role the podcast has been in their personal faith journeys. Until then, keep encouraging your audience as they follow Jesus.